Before we talk about existentialism, not about the world, about you, who decided who you are? Not your name, not your job, not your age. Who decided the person you believe yourself to be? Was it your parents? The stories you were told as a child? The expectations quietly placed on you? Your culture? Your religion? Your failures? Your achievements? Or was it you? Because there is a moment, and it does not arrive dramatically, when something subtle shifts. You begin to sense that the structure you've been standing on might not be fixed, that the identity you wear might not be assigned, that the path you're walking might not have been designed. And in that moment, something uncomfortable appears. Not meaninglessness, not despair. Freedom. The kind that doesn't feel inspiring, the kind that feels exposed. Because if no script was written, then every step is yours. If no destiny guarantees direction, then every decision shapes you. If there is no fixed essence inside you, then you must build one. Tonight, we're not asking whether life has meaning. We're asking something more dangerous. What happens when meaning depends on you? We're going to explore the shock of realizing you were not assigned, the burden of defining yourself, why we hide from freedom and call it fate, why anxiety might be proof that you are awake, why the universe does not respond to your questions, why authenticity costs more than obedience, why responsibility expands the moment excuses disappear, and why most people would rather live inside a role than face the vertigo of possibility. This is existentialism, not as theory, not as history, but as an experience. If you have ever felt that quiet pressure of choice, that fear of wasting your life, that sense that no one is coming to decide for you, then you've already felt the edge of it. Existentialism does not promise comfort. It does not promise certainty. It does not promise cosmic reassurance. It only does one thing. It removes the illusion that someone else is responsible for your existence. And that realization is heavier than any cage. So tonight, we unfold it carefully. Freedom, responsibility, self-deception, the absurd, authenticity, meaning without guarantees. Sit back, my friend. You're listening to Wise Alchemy. Let's begin. Most people never consciously agree to their life. They slide into it. You grow up hearing what is admirable, what is embarrassing, what is realistic, what is foolish, what people like us do. And slowly, without noticing, you begin arranging yourself to fit. You don't wake up thinking, I will now adopt this identity. You wake up thinking, this is normal. Normal is powerful. It disguises structure as nature. You go to school because that is what happens after childhood. You choose a career because adulthood requires one. You measure yourself by milestones because everyone else does. The script feels less like instruction and more like gravity. It pulls without asking. And gravity feels unquestionable. But existentialism begins when gravity feels optional. Not absent, optional. The shift is rarely dramatic. It might happen in a quiet room, late at night, after a failure, after a breakup, after achieving something you thought would finally define you and realizing it didn't. You pause, and for the first time, you don't feel guided, you feel unassigned. The identity that once felt obvious now feels performative. You hear yourself speak and wonder who is speaking. You look at your path and think, if I had grown up somewhere else, if I had different parents, if I had met different people, would I still be this? That question is dangerous because it exposes contingency. It reveals that much of what you call me is layered circumstance. And if it could have been different, then it is not fixed. This is where the destabilization begins. You realize the script was never absolute. It was reinforced, rewarded, encouraged, but not sealed. You were not programmed. You were influenced, and influence is not fate. Once you see that, every action becomes heavier. If you continue down the same road, it is no longer automatic. It is chosen. If you remain in your beliefs, they are no longer inherited. They are endorsed. If you stay silent, it is no longer passivity. It is participation. Freedom doesn't announce itself as possibility. It announces itself as responsibility. Because the moment the script disappears, so does the excuse. You can no longer say, "This is just who I am." You must say, "This is who I am choosing to be." And that sentence is terrifying. Because choosing implies ownership. Ownership implies accountability. Accountability implies that regret is real. You might waste your freedom. You might choose poorly. You might hide behind roles again just to escape the pressure. And here is the most unsettling part. Even hiding is a choice. You can pretend the script still binds you. You can pretend you are limited. You can pretend you have no alternatives. But once you've seen the openness, you cannot unknow it. Existentialism begins at that fracture. Not when roles disappear, but when their inevitability does. You stand in front of your life and realize it is less written than you thought, less structured than you assumed, less guaranteed than you hoped. And suddenly, what once felt safe feels exposed. You are not assigned. You are not finished. You are not defined by default. You are a being in motion, authoring yourself in real time. And that realization does not feel heroic. It feels like standing at the edge of something vast with no railing. The script didn't collapse. You just stepped outside of it. And now the page is blanker than before. Not empty, but waiting. And waiting demands something from you. Not certainty, not perfection, just authorship. And authorship is heavier than obedience will ever be. Here is the idea that separates existentialism from almost every philosophy that came before it. You are not born finished. There is no fixed essence hiding inside you, waiting to be uncovered. There is no pre-written true self buried under layers of distraction. You are not an object with a built-in purpose. You are not a tool designed for a function. You are not a role waiting to be activated. You exist. And only afterward do you define what that existence means. For most of history, people believed the opposite. Everything was assumed to have a nature before it appeared. A knife is made to cut. A clock is made to measure time. A chair is made to support weight. Its purpose comes first. Its existence fulfills that purpose. Essence precedes existence. But existentialism makes a dangerous claim. Humans are not like that. There is no cosmic manufacturer assigning you a function, no hidden specification sheet determining your meaning, no universal instruction manual handed to you at birth. You arrive without a completed definition. And that changes everything. Because if there is no fixed essence, then you cannot discover your purpose like an archaeologist uncovering ruins. You must create it. You show up first. Then you decide. You act. You choose. You commit. And through those choices, you shape what you become. This is what is meant by the phrase, existence precedes essence. It sounds abstract, but its implications are concrete. It means there is no permanent you underneath your decisions. Your character is not revealed, it is built. Your values are not found, they are formed. Your destiny is not waiting, it is authored. And that realization strips away comfort. Because if nothing about you is guaranteed, then nothing about you is protected either. You cannot hide behind, "this is just how I am." You cannot blame temperament, upbringing, or fate as final explanations. They influence you, but they do not complete you. You are always in the process of becoming. Even refusing to decide becomes a decision. Even drifting becomes authorship. Even silence becomes a statement. This is where existentialism becomes heavy. Because if your identity is not fixed, then it is fragile. And fragile things require maintenance. You must continually define yourself through action. There is no resting inside a permanent definition, no stable label that ends the process. You are not something, you are becoming something. And becoming never fully settles. That is why this idea feels less like empowerment and more like exposure. There is no final safety in being who you truly are. There is only the ongoing responsibility of choosing who you are becoming. Nothing about you is guaranteed. Not your courage, not your integrity, not your purpose. You are responsible for constructing them, and construction never ends. That is the terror and the dignity of existence before definition. Freedom rarely arrives as triumph. It arrives as instability. When people imagine freedom, they picture confidence, clarity, strength. But existentialists describe something different. They describe dizziness, because once you realize nothing is fixed, you are no longer contained. And containment, even when restrictive, feels safe. Possibility is not light, it is heavy. You could leave, you could stay, you could speak, you could remain silent. You could destroy what you built, you could build something new. You could become someone unrecognizable to your past self, and every one of those possibilities carries consequence. When nothing is predetermined, everything depends on you. That realization creates a specific kind of anxiety, not panic, not fear of something specific, but a background tension, a quiet awareness that the future is open. Existentialists call this anxiety something different from ordinary fear. Fear has an object. You fear failure. You fear rejection. You fear loss. Anxiety has no object. It is the sensation of facing open space. It is the mind registering that there is no fixed direction, no guaranteed outcome, no invisible hand steering the process. You are steering, and you may not know where you're going. That's why freedom feels like vertigo. When you stand on solid ground, you feel stable. When you stand at the edge of a cliff, you feel possibility. The cliff doesn't push you, it simply allows you to jump. That allowance is what unsettles you. Existential anxiety is the awareness that you are not constrained as tightly as you hoped. You can make the wrong decision. You can waste your potential. You can refuse to act and later regret it. You can choose comfort over growth. You can choose safety over authenticity, and no cosmic authority will intervene. The responsibility is yours. This is why existentialists do not treat anxiety as weakness. They treat it as evidence. Evidence that you recognize your freedom. Children rarely experience existential anxiety. They live inside assigned structures. The anxiety appears when those structures loosen, when you see alternatives, when you understand that your life is not unfolding automatically. It is being shaped by your participation. Anxiety becomes the emotional signature of possibility. It signals that you are aware of your range, that you know you are not fully determined, and that knowledge destabilizes. It removes the comfort of inevitability. You are not on rails. You are not inside a cage. You are standing in open space. No walls, no instructions, no final guarantees. And your mind reacts, not because something is broken, but because something is exposed. Consciousness meeting freedom produces tension, and that tension is not a flaw in the system. It is the system working. Anxiety is not the enemy of freedom. It is the shadow freedom casts. And the more aware you become, the longer that shadow stretches. The moment freedom becomes visible, authority changes shape. Not because it disappears, but because it loses its automatic legitimacy. Inherited structures, religion, tradition, culture, or ideology once functioned as unquestioned frameworks. They did not ask for your consent. They assumed it. You were born into them, and birth felt like agreement. But once you recognize that you could choose differently, something subtle happens. Tradition no longer commands, it persuades. Culture no longer defines, it proposes. Belief no longer binds, it invites. That shift may seem small. It is not. Because when something becomes optional, it must compete, and competition introduces doubt. You can still practice the faith you inherited, but now you know others live differently and sincerely. You can still follow the moral code you were taught, but now you know alternative codes exist and function. You can still live by the expectations of your community, but now you understand you are cooperating, not obeying. This awareness removes the shield of inevitability. You are no longer carried by authority, you are endorsing it. And endorsement is heavier than obedience, because obedience allows you to say, I am following what is right. Endorsement forces you to say, I have decided this is right. That decision transfers responsibility. If your belief leads to harm, you chose it. If your tradition excludes someone, you accepted it. If your ideology blinds you, you embraced it. Existentialism does not demand that you reject authority. It demands that you stop pretending authority is self-justifying. Authority becomes something you either authenticate or abandon. And internal authority is harder to carry. External rules feel firm. Internal conviction must be maintained. You cannot point upward and say, this is the law. You must point inward and say, this is my decision. That shift is destabilizing, because when something goes wrong, you cannot hide behind, that's just how it is. You must confront, that's what I chose. This is the beginning of existential responsibility. Not rebellion, not rejection, but ownership. Ownership of belief. Ownership of action. Ownership of consequence. Inherited authority once functioned like scaffolding. It held your life in place. But once you see that the scaffolding can be removed, you must decide whether to keep it standing. And if you keep it, it stands because you allow it to. That realization strips away passive identity. You are no longer simply shaped by tradition. You are participating in its continuation or its collapse. And participation cannot pretend to be innocence. That is the deeper collapse, not of religion, not of culture, but of unquestioned authority. Once freedom is recognized, nothing holds you without your consent. And consent carries weight. The weight of choosing what governs you. and living with what that choice produces. There comes a moment when excuses stop working. Not because someone confronts you, not because society collapses, but because you quietly understand something. Nothing is holding you in place. No invisible script, no fixed essence, no predetermined role that guarantees who you must become. And when that realization settles in, what remains is exposure. Not dramatic, not theatrical, a quieter exposure. The kind that happens when you are alone and recognize there is nothing left to blame. No destiny steering you, no role trapping you, no cosmic assignment defining you in advance. Without inherited identity, you cannot say, "This is simply who I am." Without guaranteed purpose, you cannot say, "This is what I was meant to do." Without fixed structure, you cannot say, "I had no choice." Existentialism removes those sentences. It does not shout, it does not accuse, it simply removes the cover. And when the cover is gone, something uncomfortable becomes visible. You are participating in your own becoming. Even when you claim you are stuck, even when you say this is just how life is, even when you drift. Drifting is not neutral. It is movement without direction. Avoidance is not absence. It is a decision not to confront. Silence is not emptiness. It is restraint. Exposure means you cannot pretend your life is unfolding automatically. It is accumulating, choice by choice, response by response, habit by habit. You are not being carried, you are shaping, and shaping carries weight. Because once you understand this, every action becomes yours. If you stay in a life that no longer fits, you stayed. If you abandon something meaningful, you abandoned it. If you repeat a pattern, you reinforced it. This is not moral condemnation, it is structural honesty. Existentialism does not shame you, it clarifies you. And clarity feels sharp. Exposure also reveals something else, not just your weakness, your possibility. Without assigned identity, nothing limits you except what you accept. Without predetermined essence, you are not trapped in a permanent version of yourself. Without destiny, there is no final script you must follow. You are not finished. You are in motion, and motion is unpredictable. That unpredictability is frightening because you can waste yourself. You can live below your capacity. You can choose comfort over depth. You can avoid growth until time closes the door. There is no guarantee you will become something meaningful, but there is also no guarantee you won't. That is the burden and the power. Exposure means that your future is not secured by cosmic design. It depends on what you do when no one is commanding you, when no structure forces you, when no identity protects you. You are not a completed object placed into the world. You are a project unfolding inside it. And projects can fail. They can stall. They can be abandoned. But they can also be built. Existentialism begins here. Not with purpose, not with optimism, not with heroic speeches, but with this stark realization. You are not assigned. You are unfinished, and nothing outside you will complete you. That is the shock of freedom. Not that you can do anything, but that you cannot escape what you choose to do with it. You stand exposed, and from this point forward, whatever you become will not be fate. It will be participation. Most people imagine freedom as something dramatic, a bold resignation, a confession of love, a public stand against injustice. a radical reinvention. But existential freedom is rarely loud. It is quiet, constant, unavoidable. It operates in ordinary moments. You wake up and follow the same routine. You scroll instead of creating. You stay silent when something feels wrong. You postpone the difficult conversation. You say, maybe later. And you tell yourself, I didn't choose this. This is just how things are. I had no real option. But existentialism challenges that comfort, not because it ignores external pressure, not because it pretends circumstances don't exist, but because even inside pressure, you still respond. And response is choice. Inaction is not neutral. It is directional. When you do nothing, you are choosing continuity. When you stay quiet, you are choosing peace over conflict. When you avoid risk, you are choosing safety over expansion. You may not feel empowered, but you are not absent. You are participating. This is where existential responsibility becomes uncomfortable, because the phrase, I had no choice, often hides something deeper. I did not want to face the consequences of another choice. That is different. There are constraints, yes. There are limits, yes. But within limits, there are still alternatives, even if they are painful. You can quit. You can speak. You can leave. You can fail. The cost may be high, but the existence of cost does not eliminate freedom. It only makes it heavier. This is why existential thinkers speak about bad faith, the act of pretending you are less free than you are. Bad faith is not lying to others. It is lying to yourself. It is saying, I am just a role. I am just my job. I am just what they expect. I am just how I was raised, as if identity were a fixed object. But identity is not an object. It is an accumulation of responses, and every response shapes it. Defaulting to expectation does not remove authorship. It confirms it. Choosing what is easiest shapes you. Choosing what is familiar shapes you. Choosing what is socially rewarded shapes you. You are building yourself through repetition. Even avoidance is constructive. Avoid confrontation long enough, and you become someone who avoids conflict. Avoid risk long enough, and you become someone who values comfort over growth. Avoid responsibility long enough, and you become someone who distrusts their own agency. Avoidance is not emptiness. It is architecture. This is why freedom does not wait for confidence. You do not begin choosing when you feel brave. You have already been choosing. Through every tolerated discomfort, every compromise you justified, every moment you said, this is fine, when it wasn't. Existential responsibility begins before intention. You are shaping yourself whether you mean to or not. You are becoming something through patterns. And here is the deeper weight. Your choices do not only shape you, they define what you believe a human being is allowed to be. If you choose silence, you declare silence possible. If you choose courage, you declare courage possible. If you choose compromise, you declare compromise legitimate. Every action quietly answers the question, what does it mean to be human in this situation? And your life becomes your answer. That is the burden. You cannot opt out. You cannot pause authorship. You cannot step outside responsibility by drifting. Drifting is a direction. Staying is a direction. Waiting is a direction. Even surrender is a direction. And once you see this, the comfort of passivity dissolves. You stop asking, Did I choose? And you start asking something more difficult. What kind of person am I building through this pattern? Because whether you intend to or not, you are always choosing, and choice is always shaping you. Most people believe they are what they think. Their opinions, their ideals, their internal narrative. I believe in honesty. I value discipline. I care about growth. I stand for integrity. But existentialism quietly interrupts this self-description. You are not what you claim. You are what you repeat. Thought feels defining because it is private, because it sounds noble, because it creates a sense of internal coherence. But identity does not crystallize in imagination. It forms in behavior. You can believe in courage and still avoid difficult conversations. You can value health and still neglect your body daily. You can admire discipline and still surrender to impulse. Your beliefs may be sincere, but your actions are concrete, and concrete patterns shape who you become. Existentialism shifts identity from theory to practice. You are not a stable essence waiting to be uncovered. You are an accumulation of acts. Every repeated behavior reinforces a direction. Every avoided action reinforces another. Habits are not just routines. They are identity architecture. Wake up early consistently, and you become someone who keeps promises to yourself. Procrastinate repeatedly, and you become someone who negotiates with discomfort. Speak honestly over time, and you become someone trusted. Compromise integrity repeatedly, and you become someone who bends under pressure. This is not punishment. It is construction. Character is sedimentary. Layer upon layer of action hardens into personality. You do not wake up one morning and discover your character. You discover the consequences of your patterns. This is why existentialism rejects the romantic idea of self-discovery. There is no hidden core self buried inside you. There is no pre-written true you waiting to be revealed. There is only potential. And potential means nothing without action. You do not uncover identity. You accumulate it. Each decision leaves a trace. Each trace makes the next similar decision easier. Consistency creates essence. If you consistently act generously, generosity becomes less effort and more instinct. If you consistently choose comfort, comfort becomes your compass. Identity is momentum, and momentum does not care about your self-description. It cares about repetition. This is where the burden intensifies, because you cannot hide behind aspiration. You cannot say, "I am trying." Existentially speaking, you are doing. Trying is a stage. Doing is a direction. The self is not theoretical. It is enacted. Over time, small actions matter more than dramatic declarations. One bold promise does not define you. 10 quiet repetitions do. This reframes responsibility in a practical way. You are not required to solve your entire identity today. You are required to understand that every action contributes to it. Every routine is a vote. Every compromise is a vote. Every discipline is a vote. You are voting for the kind of person you are becoming. And over time, the votes add up. You don't find yourself. You build yourself through consistency. And that is both grounding and demanding, because it means transformation is possible, but it also means excuses are thin. You are not what you think you are. You are what you practice, and practice becomes essence. Self-creation is not philosophical abstraction. It is daily behavior. Not dramatic reinvention, not poetic self-analysis, but repeated action shaping who you are allowed to become. You do not discover yourself. You accumulate yourself. And every day, whether consciously or not, you are adding another layer. Jean-Paul Sartre takes freedom one step further than most people are comfortable with. It's not just that you are choosing your own life. It's that every choice quietly declares, this is what a human being can be. When you act, you don't merely shape your identity. You present a model. You demonstrate a version of humanity in motion. And whether you intend to or not, others are watching. But even more than that, you are watching. Sartre's radical claim is unsettling because it removes privacy from ethics. You cannot say, this is just my personal decision, because decisions are not isolated events. They are statements about what is permissible. When you lie for convenience, you are not just saying, this is useful for me. You are saying, in situations like this, lying is an acceptable human response. When you endure something silently, you are declaring, this is how a person may live. When you act courageously, you are not simply being brave. You are illustrating, this is possible. Existentialism argues that there is no divine template for what a human is supposed to be, no fixed blueprint, no cosmic definition. So every act contributes to defining that blueprint. In choosing for yourself, you choose for humanity. This doesn't mean others are forced to imitate you. It means your actions participate in shaping what is thinkable, what is tolerable, what is imaginable. Your behavior becomes part of the human record, and that realization adds weight to ordinary moments. Existential responsibility is not only about personal consequences, it is about representation. You are always representing an answer to the question, what should a human do here? Even indifference answers it. Even avoidance answers it. Even silence answers it. If you stay quiet in the face of injustice, you communicate that silence is an option. If you speak, you communicate that resistance is possible. Freedom is never purely individual. It radiates outward. You might say, but I'm not trying to set an example. Sartre would respond, you are anyway. Because there is no neutral human action. Every act affirms a standard. Every refusal affirms a standard. Every compromise affirms a standard. And this is why existential freedom feels heavy. Because your life is not merely your own experiment. It is a visible hypothesis about what being human means. You cannot escape this implication. Even choosing not to care communicates something. It communicates that detachment is viable. And over time, these small signals accumulate culturally. Societies are shaped not only by laws or leaders, but by millions of individual choices. Existentialism refuses the comfort of thinking, I am just one person. You are one person, but you are also a participant in defining humanity. The ethical weight here is subtle. It does not require perfection. It does not demand heroism in every moment. It simply demands awareness. When you choose, you are not just deciding what you prefer. You are deciding what you consider livable, what you consider acceptable, what you consider human. This reframes everyday actions, your work ethic, your honesty, your compassion, your cruelty, your laziness, your generosity. They are not private quirks. They are contributions to the ongoing question, what does it mean to live? Existentialism does not say your choice will determine the fate of the world. It says your choice participates in it. You are always modeling, always illustrating, always suggesting. And that realization can feel overwhelming, but it can also be clarifying. Because if your choices matter beyond you, then even small actions carry dignity. Even small integrity counts. Freedom is not a solo performance. It is a public statement. And every day, quietly, you are drafting a definition of what a human life can look like, whether you intend to or not. Freedom is not just heavy. It is inconvenient. It interrupts comfort. It exposes possibility. And because it exposes possibility, it also exposes accountability. That is why we instinctively look for shelter from it. Sartre calls this shelter bad faith. Bad faith is not hypocrisy in the usual sense. It is not about deceiving others. It is about strategically forgetting your own agency. It is when you act as though you are a fixed object in the world rather than a choosing consciousness. You reduce yourself to a role, a label, a function, a personality type. You say, "That's just who I am. I'm not built for that. I don't have a choice. This is how it's always been." On the surface, these statements seem harmless. Sometimes they even feel honest. But look closely. They turn tendencies into destiny. They turn patterns into prisons. They turn circumstances into absolutes. Bad faith begins the moment you stop distinguishing between what influences you and what defines you. A waiter performs his role so completely that he convinces himself he is nothing more than a waiter. An employee hides behind company policy as if policy erases personal judgment. A person trapped in a routine insists, "I can't change," when what they mean is, change would be frightening. In each case, the role becomes a shield. If you are only the role, then you are not responsible for how you inhabit it. If you are only the system's product, then you are not accountable for your response to it. Bad faith offers relief. It shrinks the field of responsibility. It narrows the horizon of possibility. It makes life feel smaller and therefore safer. But that safety has a cost. When you treat yourself as an object, you deny the very thing that makes you human, the ability to transcend your current state. Existentialism does not deny limitation. You are shaped by history, by biology, by culture, by economic reality, by trauma, by opportunity. But within all of that shaping, there is still stance. You still choose how to interpret your situation. You still choose what meaning to assign. You still choose whether to comply, resist, adapt, or transform. Bad faith whispers, "You are stuck." Existentialism replies, "You are situated, not frozen." There is a difference. To be situated is to exist within conditions. To be frozen is to pretend those conditions are your essence. Bad faith is seductive because it removes anxiety. If you are merely an object reacting to forces, then you are not responsible for the shape of your life. But the anxiety returns in another form, as resentment, boredom, quiet dissatisfaction. Because somewhere beneath the role, you know you are participating. You know that even your compliance is chosen. And that knowledge does not disappear. It lingers. The greatest danger of bad faith is not moral failure. It is stagnation. You stop evolving because you stop admitting you are free. You stop revising yourself because you insist you are complete. You stop taking ownership because you prefer explanation over responsibility. Existential freedom is precisely uncomfortable because it refuses to let you hide. It keeps asking, are you acting or performing? Are you choosing or pretending you can't? Are you becoming or repeating? Bad faith is the attempt to silence those questions. Existentialism refuses to let them go. It insists that even when you deny your freedom, you are exercising it. Even avoidance is a decision. Even silence is a stance. Even saying, "I had no choice," is itself a choice about how you see yourself. And that is the unsettling truth. You are never fully off the hook. Not because you are guilty, but because you are capable. Bad faith shrinks you into a thing. Existential awareness restores you as a creator. The moment you stop saying, "This is just how I am," and begin saying, "This is what I keep choosing," step back into authorship. Uncomfortable, exposed, but real. Freedom does not end with one bold decision. It does not climax in a single dramatic moment of self-definition. It continues, quietly, daily, relentlessly. This is where existentialism becomes heavy, because once you accept that you are the author of your life, you also accept something else. There is no final draft, no permanent arrival, no moment where you can say, "I'm done becoming." Self-creation is not a breakthrough. It is maintenance. You choose a direction, you act on it, you begin shaping yourself. And then the next day, you must choose again. And the day after that. There is no cosmic confirmation that you chose correctly, no universal stamp of approval, no divine message saying, "Yes, that was the right path." You move forward without guarantees. And that absence of guarantee is exhausting, because certainty conserves energy. Doubt consumes it. When nothing defines you permanently, everything requires attention. Every habit reinforces a version of you. Every compromise shifts the trajectory slightly. Every repeated action thickens a pattern, and patterns become character. Character becomes reputation. Reputation becomes life structure. You are not creating a single decision. You are creating momentum, and momentum requires upkeep. Existentialism freedom is not a one-time rebellion against expectation. It is a continuous negotiation with who you are becoming. You cannot freeze yourself into an identity and retire from responsibility. Even consistency must be chosen. Even loyalty must be renewed. Even belief must be reaffirmed. That renewal costs energy. This is why self-creation feels tiring, because you are never completely finished. There is no final, secure version of yourself that eliminates future responsibility. You do not graduate from freedom. You live inside it. And freedom demands vigilance. Not paranoia, but awareness. If you drift, you are still shaping yourself. If you act unconsciously, you are still building patterns. If you stop reflecting, you are still becoming something. There is no pause button. This is the weight of becoming. Not dramatic anxiety, not heroic suffering, just the quiet, ongoing awareness that your life is not assembling itself. You are assembling it, and assembly requires attention. Existentialism does not promise empowerment as a final reward. It offers authorship as a condition. And authorship includes editing, revision, correction, maintenance. You may never feel fully confident in your choices. You may never feel certain you've constructed the right life. But the absence of guarantee does not invalidate the effort. It simply means the work is yours. The fatigue of freedom is not a flaw in the philosophy. It is the cost of ownership. Because when nothing is pre-written, every day contributes to the draft, and the draft never closes. You are not building a decision. You are building a pattern, and patterns become destiny, not because they were assigned, but because they were repeated. This is the weight, and this is the dignity. Becoming never stops, and neither does responsibility. There is something deeply calming about locating the cause of your life outside yourself. Not because circumstances are imaginary. They are real. They shape us. They constrain us. They wound us. But there is a subtle psychological shift that happens when explanation becomes absolution. It begins with accuracy. I grew up in a difficult environment. The economy is unstable. The system is unfair. My personality makes this hard. All of these statements can be true. Existentialism does not deny influence. It denies inevitability. The danger is not in recognizing pressure. The danger is in turning pressure into destiny. Because the moment you say, "I had no real choice," you are no longer describing a condition. You are rewriting your role in it. Blame does something powerful to the nervous system. It simplifies the world. If society determined everything, you are a product, not a participant. If your personality determined everything, you are a fixed object, not a living agent. If biology determined everything, you are a mechanism, not a chooser. And mechanisms do not carry guilt. Products do not carry responsibility. Objects do not carry regret. That is the comfort. Responsibility produces anxiety because it multiplies possibility. Blame reduces possibility to one narrow corridor. This was always going to happen. But if that is true, then you do not have to examine the moments when you complied. You do not have to confront the times you stayed silent. You do not have to admit you preferred comfort over risk. Blame creates a clean narrative. You are acted upon, not acting. Bad faith begins precisely here, not in denying that systems influence us, but in overstating their power until your agency disappears completely. There is a quiet exaggeration that happens. Influence becomes compulsion. Limitation becomes imprisonment. Difficulty becomes impossibility. And that exaggeration is soothing. Because if the system decided everything, then your fear was reasonable. Your inaction was inevitable. Your compromises were unavoidable. You never have to sit with the harder sentence, "I could have chosen differently, and I didn't." That sentence is destabilizing. It restores freedom, and with freedom comes accountability. Existentialism is not naive about structures. It knows history shapes lives. It knows inequality constrains options. It knows trauma limits perception. But it insists on a disturbing claim. Even within constraint, there is response. Even within pressure, there is interpretation. Even within structure, there is posture. Bad faith does not eliminate structure. It uses structure as total explanation. It converts "this influenced me" into "this defined me." And once something defines you completely, you are no longer responsible for altering it. Blame narrows the field of possibility until only one path remains, the path you already walked. That is why it feels peaceful. Open possibility is overwhelming. Closed possibility is manageable. Blame reduces the infinite to the inevitable. But in doing so, it costs you something enormous: the right to claim authorship. If everything was forced, nothing was chosen. And if nothing was chosen, nothing is yours. The existential position is harsher, but more dignifying. You were shaped, but not finished, influenced but not sealed, pressured but not erased. Bad faith begins when you trade that dignity for relief, when you prefer certainty over agency, when you say, "This is just how things are," and quietly stop asking, "What will I do with what I've been given?" There is a sentence that sounds harmless, even honest. That's just who I am. It feels self-aware. It feels grounded. It feels mature. But sometimes it is something else entirely. It is a wall. Personality is real. Temperament exists. Some people are naturally cautious. Some are impulsive. Some are socially energized. Some are reflective and quiet. Existentialism does not deny difference. What it questions is the moment when description becomes destiny. I'm just not ambitious. I'm bad at confrontation. I'm an introvert. I've always been like this. These statements begin as observations, but they often end as conclusions. A pattern becomes a prison. Bad faith enters quietly, not by denying your traits, but by declaring them permanent. It turns tendencies into absolutes, preferences into identity, history into fate. And that transformation feels relieving. Because if you are just not the kind of person who takes risks, you never have to confront the fear of trying. If you are just emotionally distant, you never have to test whether vulnerability is possible. If you are not leadership material, you never have to face the anxiety of stepping forward. Labels reduce effort. They close doors before you have to consider opening them. Personality explains tendencies, but bad faith treats those tendencies as walls. There is a difference between saying, "I tend to avoid conflict," and saying, "I cannot handle conflict." The first leaves room for growth. The second seals it. One describes behavior. The other defines essence. Existentialism pushes against this freezing of identity, because if existence precedes essence, then who you are is not fixed, it is ongoing. You are not a completed object. You are a project in motion. But that idea is exhausting. Fluidity requires maintenance. Self-creation requires attention. It is easier to inherit a personality than to revise it. It is easier to say, "This is just me," than to admit, "This is how I've been acting." The difference matters. One is an identity claim. The other is a behavioral report. Bad faith freezes fluidity because fluidity is unstable. If you are changeable, you are responsible for change. If you are unfinished, you are accountable for what you become next. That is heavy. So we hide behind language. We turn traits into destiny. We turn comfort zones into identity. We confuse repetition with essence. But repetition does not equal definition. A pattern is not a prophecy. It is simply a habit that has been reinforced, and habits can be interrupted. Bad faith tells you this is your nature. Existentialism replies, this is your current posture. One closes the future, the other leaves it open. And openness, as always, is frightening. Because if "that's just who I am" is not final, then you are still responsible for deciding who you will become. There is a modern version of "I had no choice." It sounds more sophisticated, more scientific, more rational. My brain is wired this way. It's just evolutionary instinct. That's how humans are programmed. It's hormonal. It's genetic. These explanations carry authority. They borrow the language of neuroscience, psychology, biology, and because they sound objective, they feel undeniable. Biology is real. Your nervous system influences your reactions. Your hormones affect mood. Your genetic inheritance shapes temperament. Existentialism does not deny the body. What it questions is the jump from explanation to inevitability. There is a subtle shift that happens when explanation becomes alibi. Predisposition becomes permission. Tendency becomes inevitability. Impulse becomes identity. For example, I have an aggressive temperament becomes I can't help how I react. Humans are wired for selfishness becomes that's just human nature. My brain craves dopamine becomes I'm not responsible for my habits. The explanation is accurate, but incomplete. Biology explains pressure. It does not dictate response. You may feel anger automatically. You do not have to act on it automatically. You may feel fear reflexively. You do not have to surrender to it reflexively. You may feel desire intensely. You do not have to justify every action through it. The body produces signals, but signals are not commands. Determinism feels scientific and therefore safe, because if your behavior is fully explained by biology, then it is not truly chosen, and if it is not chosen, it cannot be judged. This is the emotional relief. Science becomes a shield against responsibility. But existentialism insists on something uncomfortable. Even within biological constraint, there is interpretation. Even within instinct, there is stance. You are not a blank slate, but you are not a puppet of chemistry either. Your brain generates impulses. You generate decisions about those impulses. Bad faith begins when you collapse the two, when you say, my wiring made me do it, instead of, my wiring influenced me and I acted. Biology narrows the field of possibility. It does not eliminate it. And yet the temptation is strong, because determinism removes guilt. It removes regret. It removes the need to revise yourself. It allows you to say, this is just how I'm built. And that sentence carries the comfort of inevitability. Freedom, by contrast, feels fragile. It feels less certain than neuroscience, less authoritative than evolutionary theory, less grounded than hormones and genetics. Freedom feels naive next to biology. But existentialism does not compete with science. It adds a layer that science cannot replace: responsibility. Science can explain what pressures you feel. It cannot decide what you will do with them. You were shaped by biology, but you are not reducible to it. Your instincts speak, but they do not conclude. Bad faith turns biology into destiny. Existentialism treats biology as context, and context does not eliminate authorship. It complicates it. The moment biology becomes excuse, freedom looks unrealistic. The moment biology becomes influence, freedom becomes demanding, but intact. You are not free from your body, but you are not finished by it either. And that difference is where responsibility lives. There is another way we escape freedom. Not through blame, not through biology, but through performance. You step into a role and stay there. Employee, manager, parent, patriot, caretaker, leader, rebel. Roles are not fake. They are necessary. Society functions because people perform roles. You cannot live without them. But existentialism asks a sharper question. When does a role become a hiding place? Over time, roles begin to feel solid. You don't just work as a lawyer, you become a lawyer. You don't just act responsibly, you become the responsible one. You don't just stay calm in crisis, you become the rational one. At first, this feels stable. Clear identity, predictable behavior, recognizable function. But something subtle happens. You begin performing instead of choosing. You follow expectations automatically. You speak in tones that fit the part. You respond the way someone like you is supposed to respond. The mask becomes routine, and routine becomes identity. Bad faith enters when function becomes essence, when "this is what I do" becomes "this is what I am." Because once you fully identify with the role, you no longer question it. If you are just doing your job, you don't have to examine the moral implications. If you are just the strict parent, you don't have to question whether strictness is necessary. If you are just the tough boss, you don't have to evaluate whether toughness is cruelty. The role provides a script, and scripts reduce friction. They shrink choice. Because choice only exists when you step outside the script long enough to evaluate it. Roles simplify life. They tell you how to act, how to speak, how to respond. And simplicity reduces anxiety. You no longer ask, "What should I do?" You ask, "What would someone like me do?" The difference is subtle, but profound. In the first question, you are authoring. In the second, you are performing. Bad faith is not about lying to others. It is about convincing yourself that the role is total, that you are identical with your function, that your job, your personality position, your social identity exhaust who you are. But roles are tools. They are situational. They are adjustable. You can perform authority without being authoritarian. You can perform professionalism without erasing your conscience. You can inhabit a role without becoming imprisoned by it. Bad faith happens when you forget that the role is something you step into, not something that defines you permanently. When you collapse, "I am acting as a manager," into "I am nothing but a manager," the first leaves space. The second seals it. Existential freedom is uncomfortable because it reminds you that even within a role, you are choosing how to play it. You are not a costume. You are not a function. You are not a fixed character in someone else's script. Roles are practical. They organize society, but they do not remove authorship. And the moment you hide inside a role to avoid questioning your actions, that role becomes a refuge. Comfortable, predictable, but smaller than you are. Roles simplify life by shrinking choice. Existentialism complicates life by restoring it. You can perform, but you cannot disappear into performance without cost, because even behind the mask, you are still the one wearing it. There is one sentence that quietly dissolves responsibility faster than any other. I had no choice. It sounds factual. It sounds reasonable. Sometimes it even sounds tragic. But very often it is the most comfortable lie we tell ourselves. Not because options were unlimited, not because circumstances were easy, but because difficulty is not the same as impossibility. Most situations restrict us. Few eliminate us. And yet, after the decision is made, after the damage is done, we often rewrite the past. We say, "It was the only option. I couldn't do anything else. There was no way out." What we usually mean is, the other options were painful. The alternative was risky. I was afraid of the consequences. Bad faith thrives in this rewriting. It converts "I chose the safer path" into "there was no other path." It converts "I didn't want the cost" into "it wasn't possible." The difference is subtle but enormous. Saying "I chose" preserves agency. Saying "I had no choice" erases it. And erasing agency protects something fragile: self-image. If you had no choice, you cannot regret. If you had no choice, you cannot be blamed. If you had no choice, you do not have to confront the uncomfortable truth that you preferred safety over growth, silence over confrontation, comfort over risk. Regret is painful because it acknowledges freedom. It whispers, "You could have done otherwise." Bad faith cannot tolerate that whisper, so it silences it. It replaces freedom with inevitability. Memory itself becomes edited. You forget the hesitation before you decided. You forget the alternative you briefly considered. You forget the moment you knew there was another route, but it felt too expensive. Instead, the story becomes clean. There was nothing else I could do. But existentialism insists on something unsettling. Even when choices are constrained, there is almost always a margin, a narrow one, an uncomfortable one, a frightening one, but a margin nonetheless. You may not control the circumstances, but you control your response to them. You may not control the options presented, but you control which discomfort you are willing to tolerate. And that is still choice. Bad faith turns discomfort into impossibility. It confuses "I didn't want to" with "I couldn't." And that confusion is soothing, because "I couldn't" preserves innocence. "I didn't want to" requires honesty. The phrase "I had no choice" becomes a shield against self-examination. It removes the burden of revisiting the decision. It removes the weight of imagining a different outcome. It removes the responsibility of learning from it. But it also removes dignity, because dignity lies in ownership. Even when the choice was flawed, even when it was fearful, even when it led to regret. To say, "I chose this and I accept it," is heavier, but it is also freer. Bad faith rewrites memory to protect comfort. Existential responsibility restores memory to protect truth. Most situations limit options. Few erase them entirely. And in that small, often terrifying margin, freedom waits. Not to accuse, but to remind you, you were there. You decided. And that decision, even under pressure, was yours. Underneath every excuse, every role, every "I had no choice," there is something quieter. Not laziness, not stupidity, fear. Freedom is not just empowering, it is exposing. The moment you recognize that you are choosing, even within limits, you also recognize that you can fail. You can choose badly. You can misjudge. You can waste years. You can harm others. You can betray your own potential. Freedom magnifies consequence, and that magnification produces anxiety. Determinism does the opposite. It narrows the horizon. If everything is caused by biology, society, personality, history, then the future becomes predictable. Predictability is calming. If your path is preset, you don't have to scan infinite possibilities. If outcomes are determined, you don't have to weigh moral risk. If you are carried by forces larger than you don't have to stand alone. That is the sedative effect of determinism. It quiets the nervous system. It reduces the dizziness of possibility. Existentialism describes freedom as vertigo for a reason. Imagine standing at the edge of an open cliff, not because you are about to fall, but because you realize you could jump. The fear is not gravity, it is possibility. Determinism removes the edge. It builds a railing. It says, you were always going this way. You were always going to become this. There was never another path. And with that sentence, anxiety softens, because if the path was inevitable, you cannot be blamed for walking it. Bad faith is not laziness. It is fear management. It is the psyche protecting itself from overload. Freedom requires constant awareness. You are choosing your response. You are shaping your character. You are influencing your future. That awareness is exhausting. Determinism simplifies. It replaces openness with order. It replaces ambiguity with explanation. It replaces responsibility with causality. And causality feels solid, scientific, grounded. Existential freedom, by contrast, feels fragile. It offers no guarantees, no universal script, no cosmic reassurance. It tells you are responsible. And responsibility feels heavier than causation. We escape freedom because it exposes us. It reveals that we are not passive, not objects, not merely products of circumstance. It reveals that even in constraint, we are agents, and agents can be judged by others and by themselves. Self-deception, then, is not foolishness. It is insulation. It is psychological padding against vertigo. To say, "This was determined," is to reduce the height of the cliff. To say, "This is just how it is," is to narrow the open sky. But existentialism insists that the openness is real. You may prefer the railing. You may prefer the script. You may prefer the calm of inevitability. But underneath the sedation, you are still standing on open ground. And that ground, however frightening, is yours. Not all anxiety is broken circuitry. Some of it is clarity. Clinical anxiety is real. It can be physiological, chemical, trauma-based. It can distort perception, amplify threat, and trap someone in patterns they did not choose. That kind of anxiety deserves care, treatment, and compassion. But existential anxiety is something different. It does not arise from imbalance. It arises from awareness. Fear is usually about something specific: a test, a confrontation, a loss, a threat. Anxiety, in the existential sense, is stranger. It appears when there is no single object to point to. Nothing is attacking you. Nothing is immediately wrong, and yet something feels unstable. Why? Because you recognize that nothing is decided for you. You could choose differently. You could change direction. You could fail. You could succeed. You could waste your time. You could redefine yourself. The anxiety comes from openness. When life is scripted, anxiety narrows. When life is assigned, anxiety reduces. When roles are fixed, options shrink. But when you understand that your future is not predetermined, that your identity is not guaranteed, that your decisions genuinely matter, a different sensation appears. Unease. Not because something is collapsing, but because nothing is holding you in place. Existential anxiety is the emotional reaction to possibility. It is what happens when consciousness realizes it is not confined. It is the nervous system adjusting to freedom. You feel it when you realize you can leave a path you thought was permanent. You understand that your career is not destiny. You see that your beliefs are chosen, not inherited law. You recognize that your character is not fixed. Nothing externally dramatic happens, but internally, the ground shifts. Existential thinkers argue that this anxiety is not pathology. It is evidence of awareness. It means you see that life is contingent, that there is no automatic outcome, that you are involved. It is the difference between "I am trapped" and "I am responsible." Responsibility creates weight. Weight creates tension. Tension creates anxiety. That does not mean something is wrong. It means something is open. Existential anxiety appears when you realize your life is not predetermined. You are not following rails. You are navigating. And navigation is unsettling. Because maps provide safety, but open terrain provides freedom. Anxiety in this sense is not a malfunction. It is the shadow of possibility. It is consciousness recognizing that nothing forces you to become what you will become. And that realization, while destabilizing, is also proof that you are not asleep. It is not weakness. It is awareness adjusting to autonomy. And autonomy, by its nature, is never perfectly calm. There is a kind of guilt that has nothing to do with wrongdoing. No laws were broken. No one was betrayed. No obvious harm was done, and yet something feels unsettled. A quiet weight, a subtle self-questioning. This is not moral guilt in the traditional sense. It is existential guilt. It does not arise because you violated a rule. It arises because you recognized a possibility and did not step into it. You stayed when you could have left. You remained silent when you could have spoken. You chose comfort when growth required discomfort. You postponed a risk that mattered. The feeling is difficult to explain because nothing dramatic happened. From the outside, everything looks normal, but internally, you remember the fork in the road. You remember that there was a moment, sometimes very small, when another version of you was possible, and you walked past it. Existential guilt is born in that recognition. It is not the guilt of sin. It is the guilt of unused freedom. Regret, in this framework, becomes more than wishing the past were different. It becomes an awareness that you participated in shaping it. If everything were predetermined, regret would be irrational. You do not regret gravity. You do not regret inevitability. You regret choice. Because choice implies agency, and agency implies responsibility. Existential thinkers argue that this deeper guilt is part of being conscious. It emerges when you understand that your life is not happening to you. You are involved in it. You are not only responsible for obvious moral transgressions, you are responsible for what you become over time. That includes the slow accumulation of habits, the repeated avoidance of difficult conversations, the steady narrowing of ambition, the quiet compromises that slowly define character. There is guilt in harming others, but there is also guilt in shrinking yourself, in pretending you had no option, in saying, "That's just how things turned out," when you know there was a margin. Existential guilt does not accuse you of evil. It confronts you with potential. It says, "You could have done otherwise." And that sentence is painful because it confirms something uncomfortable. You were free enough to act differently. This is why existential guilt can feel heavier than conventional guilt. It does not end with apology. It does not end with punishment. It lingers as awareness. It is less about what you did wrong and more about what you failed to become. But there is something clarifying in it. Because if you feel this kind of guilt, it means you recognize your own authorship. It means you see that you are not merely a product of circumstance. You see that you shape the pattern of your life. Existential guilt is not about breaking rules. It is about betraying your own capacity. And that realization, however uncomfortable, contains possibility. Because if you could have acted otherwise then, you can act otherwise now. Guilt, in this sense, is not a verdict. It is proof that you understand your agency. It is freedom remembered too late, and sometimes remembered just in time. Every major decision in your life has a quiet moment where no one else can stand with you. It does not announce itself. There is no spotlight, no dramatic music, no visible line dividing before and after. From the outside, it looks ordinary. You may have talked about it for days. You may have asked friends what they would do. You may have consulted family, mentors, even strangers online. You collect perspectives. You gather reassurance. You reduce uncertainty as much as possible. But then something happens. The conversation ends. The messages stop. The room goes silent. And you realize, this part is mine. You are the one who must move. You are the one who must commit. No one else can enter the exact interior space where the decision becomes real. They can support you afterward. They can help you recover. They can celebrate with you. But they cannot occupy that inner threshold. Advice reduces risk. It clarifies options. It offers frameworks. But it cannot eliminate authorship. At some point, the question is not, what do they think? It becomes, what will I do? Even shared decisions carry this solitude. Two people can agree to marry, but each says yes individually. Two partners can start a business, but each assumes responsibility personally. Two friends can move to a new city, but each bears the consequences alone. You cannot dissolve into we, because inside every we, there are still individuals choosing. This is the isolation built into autonomy. It is not a flaw in relationships. It is not a defect in community. It is a structural feature of freedom. You cannot fully say later, I wasn't part of that, because even compliance is participation. Even hesitation is a stance. Even going along requires consent. Existential freedom means you are always involved. You may feel pressured. You may feel limited. You may feel constrained by circumstance. But there is still a margin, however small, where your response takes shape. And that margin belongs to you alone. This loneliness is uncomfortable because it removes the fantasy of substitution. No one can live your life in your place. No one can fully absorb your consequences. No one can take responsibility retroactively and say, I chose that for you. They may influence you. They may guide you. They may even pressure you. But the final agreement, the inward yes or no, remains yours. Existential thinkers do not treat this solitude as tragedy. They treat it as dignity, because it means your life is not mechanical, not automatic, not entirely scripted by others. It means your choices matter enough that they cannot be outsourced. Freedom is individual, even when life is shared. You may walk with others, you may lean on others, you may collaborate, but when it comes to authorship, you cannot delegate the pen. And that is the paradox. The very thing that makes you feel alone is the same thing that makes your life truly yours. When nothing is fixed, everything is available. And that is not always comforting. It can feel like standing at the edge of a high place, not because you want to jump, but because you realize you could. Existential freedom does not just remove constraints, it multiplies options. You could become disciplined. You could become reckless. You could leave your job. You could stay and endure. You could reinvent yourself at 30, at 40, at 60. Each possibility stands beside the others, silently asking to be chosen. And they do not disappear just because you ignore them. This is where vertigo begins. Not confusion, not stupidity, not weakness, but awareness of height. The height of what your life could become. You start to see alternate versions of yourself. The artist you never pursued. The city you never moved to. The relationship you never risked. The truth you never spoke. Possibility does not simply open doors, it also creates ghosts. And with each open path comes pressure. Choose correctly. Maximize your potential. Don't waste your one life. Modern life intensifies this experience. You are exposed to thousands of lives daily. Through screens, you see curated identities, accelerated success, extreme reinventions. You compare your present self to infinite alternatives. Not just people you know, but people across the world. The menu of possible selves expands beyond anything previous generations experienced. You are told you can be anything. You can live anywhere. You can rebrand yourself at any moment. This sounds empowering, but psychologically it is destabilizing. Because if everything is possible, then failure feels personal. If you remain where you are, it feels chosen. If you do not optimize, it feels negligent. If you settle, it feels like waste. Freedom expands opportunity, but it also expands the fear of misusing it. The fear of choosing one path and closing another forever. The fear that somewhere a better version of you is waiting, and you are falling short of it. This is existential vertigo. It is not about not knowing what to do. It is about knowing you could do too much. Paralysis does not come from lack of options. It comes from excess. When every path contains risk, when every decision excludes alternatives, when every commitment closes doors, you hesitate. You overanalyze. You wait for certainty. But certainty does not arrive, because the openness itself is the condition. Vertigo is not confusion. It is awareness of the height of possibility. You feel the drop beneath your feet, not because the ground is unstable, but because it stretches infinitely in every direction. And the dizziness comes from understanding, whatever you choose, you are responsible for the life that follows. That is the cost of open futures. Not chaos, not disorder, but exposure to vastness, and the knowledge that no one else can narrow it for you. Anxiety comes in waves. Dread settles in the background. Anxiety flares around decisions, a job change, a confession, a risk. Dread is quieter. It lingers after you've understood what freedom truly means. It begins when you recognize that your life carries no ultimate guarantee, no final explanation waiting at the end, no cosmic assurance that your effort will be justified, no invisible hand arranging outcomes into moral symmetry. You can choose carefully and still be wrong. You can commit sincerely and still lose. You can live courageously and still wonder whether it mattered. Nothing promises alignment between intention and result. Once that becomes clear, a deeper awareness forms. You are not just asking, will this succeed? You are asking, can I stand by this even if it doesn't? That is where dread lives. Not in fear of disaster, but in awareness of contingency. Everything in your life is contingent. Your beliefs can shift. Your relationships can change. Your body can fail. Your circumstances can reverse. No outcome is sealed by destiny. Existential dread is the steady recognition of that instability. It doesn't scream. It hums beneath daily routines. It whispers, this could collapse. This could have been different. No one is guaranteeing the meaning of this. And yet, you continue living. That continuation is crucial. Despair stops. Dread moves forward, slowly, consciously. Modern life intensifies this feeling. We are told we can reinvent ourselves endlessly, design our careers, curate our identities, optimize every decision. But with expanded possibility comes expanded responsibility. You cannot blame fate for what you actively design. You cannot blame destiny for paths you selected. Even hesitation becomes yours. Freedom widens opportunity, but it also widens exposure. You are not protected from uncertainty. You build without certainty. You love without certainty. You commit without certainty. And the lack of certainty never disappears completely. It becomes a permanent background awareness. Existential dread is not collapse. It is sustained exposure. Exposure to risk. Exposure to failure. Exposure to your own authorship. It strips away illusions of total control. It removes the fantasy that life will confirm you. What remains is simpler and heavier. You act without final proof. You choose without guarantee. You remain responsible without reassurance. Anxiety is the sharp edge of freedom. Dread is its long shadow. Where autonomy exists, unease follows. Not because something is wrong, but because nothing is holding you up except your decision to keep standing. A child falls and immediately asks, why? An adult loses something far more serious, a relationship, a career, a dream, and asks the same question only inwardly. The question does not disappear with maturity. It becomes internalized. Consciousness does more than record events. It organizes them. It connects them. It looks for threads that tie experience into pattern. When something painful happens, the mind doesn't simply register sensation. It searches for explanation. Not just what happened, but why this happened. Why now? Why me? Why this way? That instinct is structural. We expect proportion. We expect fairness. We expect effort to produce outcome. When you invest time, you expect progress. When you commit to someone, you expect meaning. When you endure difficulty, you expect growth. There is an unspoken assumption running beneath daily life. Reality should make sense. Not perfectly, not immediately, but eventually. We assume that if we zoom out far enough, there will be coherence. That suffering fits into a larger frame, that action and consequence are linked by something more than chance. And when that connection fails, when effort produces nothing, when kindness meets indifference, when tragedy strikes without warning, the disturbance goes deeper than frustration. It shakes orientation. Because humans do not merely want events. They want narrative. We want to believe that our actions participate in something intelligible, that our choices land somewhere, that our lives are not isolated fragments drifting without context. This hunger for explanation is not weakness. It is not naive optimism. It is a feature of awareness itself. To be conscious is to seek pattern. To seek pattern is to seek meaning. To seek meaning is to assume there is something to find. Even when people claim they don't care about meaning, their behavior suggests otherwise. They defend reputations. They justify decisions. They reinterpret failures. They narrate their lives to themselves. Significance is not an optional luxury. It is a psychological necessity. Food keeps the body alive. Meaning keeps the experience of life coherent. Without explanation, events feel disjointed. Without coherence, time feels random. Without narrative, effort feels exposed. And this is where existential tension begins. Not in despair, not in rebellion, but in expectation. The mind reaches outward, asking for alignment between effort and outcome, between suffering and justification, between existence and reason. And when the universe does not answer in the language we expect, the question does not vanish. It lingers. And that lingering is the beginning of the absurd. The sun rises whether you are grieving or celebrating. Storms form without consulting anyone's plans. Stars explode in distant galaxies without regard for human meaning. Nature moves. Not cruelly, not kindly, simply consistently. The deeper science goes, the clearer this becomes. Planets follow gravitational laws. Cells divide according to chemistry. Evolution selects traits without moral intention. There is motion, there is order, there is structure, but there is no commentary. When tragedy strikes, the universe does not pause. It does not explain itself. It does not clarify whether this loss is a lesson, a punishment, or pure accident. A child becomes ill. An earthquake destroys a city. A brilliant person fails. A careless person succeeds. Events unfold. No voice accompanies them. We are accustomed to narrative logic. Good actions leading to good outcomes, bad actions leading to consequence, effort producing reward. But reality distributes outcomes without visible ethical symmetry. Hard work sometimes leads nowhere. Kindness is not always returned. Injustice is not automatically corrected. The cosmos does not rebalance the scale in real time. And this absence of response feels strange because the human mind expects engagement. We speak into existence through prayer, through protest, through ambition, and expect some form of reply. But what we encounter instead is continuation. Rivers flow, markets fluctuate, stars burn. Biology proceeds. Not as punishment, not as affirmation, as process. Silence here is not hostility. The universe is not plotting against anyone. It is not mocking desire. It is not refusing comfort. It is simply not structured around human expectation. And that is what unsettles. The cosmos does not confirm your purpose. It does not deny it either. It does not intervene to clarify whether your suffering matters. It operates narratively. It operates mechanically. Cause leads to effect. Energy transfers. Matter rearranges. Time advances. Your personal story unfolds inside that system. But the system does not rearrange itself to highlight your arc. And this is the metaphysical shock. We long for dialogue, but encounter process. We search for reassurance, but meet continuity. The universe does not tell you who you are. It does not validate your path. It does not explain your losses. It simply continues. And in that continuation, existential tension sharpens. Because if there is no guaranteed response, no cosmic affirmation, then action happens without validation. Choice unfolds without applause. Meaning, if it exists, will not be handed back to you from the sky. The silence does not attack. It does not argue. It does not condemn. It remains. And that silence is what the absurd is built upon. The absurd does not arise from the universe alone, and it does not arise from the human mind alone. It appears in the space between them. On one side stands the human being, a creature who wants clarity, justice, direction. A mind that looks at suffering and asks why. A heart that invests effort and expects coherence in return. On the other side stands a world that rotates, shifts, destroys, creates without commentary. The absurd is born in that encounter. Albert Camus is careful here. He does not say the world is meaningless. He says the world is silent, and that silence matters. It does not confirm your hopes. It does not deny them either. It simply continues. Rain falls on the generous and the cruel. Accidents interrupt careful lives. Achievements do not guarantee fulfillment. Effort does not secure fairness. The human mind strains toward explanation and receives mechanics instead. That strain is the absurd. Camus defines it as tension, not conclusion. It is not a philosophy that announces nothing matters. It is a recognition that the universe does not supply ready-made answers. The absurd is the friction between demand and indifference. And the mistake, according to Camus, is to try to dissolve that friction too quickly. Some escape upward. They invent final explanations, ultimate purposes, narratives that promise eventual harmony. The tension disappears because the answer is assumed. Others escape downward. They declare everything pointless. They flatten value to avoid disappointment. Both moves end the confrontation. Camus refuses both. He calls them philosophical suicide, ways of silencing the problem rather than living with it. The absurd, for him, must remain alive. To live absurdly is not to despair. It is to remain lucid, to see clearly that there is no cosmic reassurance waiting behind suffering, and still refuse resignation. The absurd does not destroy action. It sharpens it. If there is no guaranteed outcome, then action becomes immediate. If there is no eternal validation, then this moment carries its own weight. Camus' image of Sisyphus pushing the stone is not tragic. It is defiant. The rock will fall. The cycle will repeat. There is no final victory. But Sisyphus knows this, and in knowing, he claims the act. The absurd demands awareness without illusion. No borrowed hope. No decorative metaphysics. No dramatic collapse into cynicism. Just sustained confrontation. You want clarity. The world offers process. You continue anyway. This is why the absurd is not nihilism. Nihilism often concludes, since there is no ultimate meaning, nothing is worth doing. Camus stops before that leap. He says there is no ultimate explanation, but that does not forbid action. The tension remains unresolved, and that unresolved state becomes the ground of revolt. Not rebellion against the universe, but refusal to pretend, refusal to invent answers, refusal to surrender to emptiness. To live absurdly is to wake each day without cosmic guarantee and still move. To create without believing creation will be immortal. To love without demanding eternity. To work without promise of metaphysical reward. The absurd is not solved. It is endured consciously. It is not a theory about life. It is a posture toward it. Longing remains. Silence remains. The collision remains. And in that sustained, honest tension, a strange dignity appears. Not because meaning has been discovered, but because illusion has been refused. Camus' answer to the absurd is not surrender. It is revolt. But revolt here does not mean violence. It does not mean revolution in the streets. It means a quiet, internal refusal to withdraw. Revolt begins when you accept that no final explanation is coming, and you act anyway. You do not wait for cosmic justice to confirm your morality. You do not require eternal reward to justify kindness. You do not demand that suffering lead somewhere before you endure it. You choose action without metaphysical insurance. That is the courage Camus is pointing toward, Because once you recognize the silence of the universe, a temptation appears. If nothing guarantees meaning, why commit at all? Revolt answers, because commitment is still possible. This is a shift in motive. You act ethically not because the universe commands it, but because you decide it matters here. You create not because your work will be remembered forever, but because the act itself is alive now. You love not because love conquers death, but because connection is real in the present. Revolt is sustained participation without promise. It is persistence without future certainty. It is effort without assurance that effort will be rewarded beyond the immediate horizon. And that is not irrational. It is lucid. Camus refuses both passive resignation and blind hope. He does not say, everything will work out. He says, work anyway. This is existential courage. Courage not built on optimism, but on awareness. You see the indifference, you feel the uncertainty, you recognize the lack of ultimate validation, and you continue. Revolt transforms freedom. In earlier sections, freedom felt destabilizing. Then it felt heavy with responsibility. Now it becomes something quieter. The ability to act without needing permission from the cosmos. Freedom continues even when validation does not. You no longer require the universe to agree with you before you choose. This does not make life grander. It makes it immediate. Small acts gain weight precisely because nothing larger is guaranteeing them. Helping someone matters because you decided it does. Building something matters because you built it. Keeping a promise matters because you chose consistency. Revolt without promise is not heroic in appearance. It is ordinary. It looks like getting up again, like trying again, like refusing to reduce life to irony or indifference. The absurd remains. The silence remains. But you refuse to let silence dictate your behavior. To act without guarantee is not irrational. It is existential courage. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just steady. And in that steadiness, freedom becomes something you practice, not something you wait to have explained. At some point, the tension stops feeling dramatic. The shock fades. The rebellion cools. The metaphysical argument quiets. What remains is something simpler and harder. A life without ultimate reassurance. No final confirmation that your path is correct. No universal guarantee that your values are objectively right. No cosmic witness recording your integrity. The universe does not certify your decisions. It does not stamp approval on your sacrifices. It does not intervene to confirm that your suffering means something. And yet, you still choose. This is the final edge of existential freedom. To live without validation is to accept that nothing beyond you is obligated to justify your commitments. You choose honesty without proof that honesty is eternally rewarded. You choose compassion without guarantee that justice will prevail. You choose discipline without certainty that effort will culminate in triumph. The silence does not vanish, but your action continues inside it. This is not heroic in the cinematic sense. It is steady. You wake up. You act. You decide. You persist. Not because meaning is promised, but because you refuse to collapse in its absence. When validation disappears, meaning becomes fragile. It is no longer reinforced by divine command, destiny, or metaphysical assurance. It rests on something far more exposed, your ongoing commitment. And that exposure can feel unsettling. Without external confirmation, doubt grows louder. Was this the right choice? Does this matter? Is this worth sustaining? There is no ultimate answer descending from above, only continuation. This is where existential maturity reveals itself. You stop asking the universe to confirm your values. You stop expecting applause for endurance. You stop demanding that life justify itself before you participate. You act anyway. Meaning does not vanish when validation vanishes. It loses armor. It becomes unprotected. And what is unprotected requires courage to maintain. Freedom without validation is not reckless. It is lucid. You see clearly that nothing guarantees your path. You see clearly that your commitments may not be universally recognized. You see clearly that your efforts may dissolve into time. And still, you respond. The universe may not answer your demand for explanation, but you answer your own situation. Through consistency, through care, through choice repeated over time. Freedom at this depth is not dramatic independence. It is sustained responsibility in a quiet world. No cosmic reassurance, no eternal guarantee, no metaphysical applause. Just you, aware, choosing again. The silence remains. So does your response. And in that steady refusal to withdraw, existential courage becomes ordinary and real. There comes a point where the internal debate loses its energy, not because your circumstances improved, not because the world suddenly became fair, but because you can no longer convincingly pretend that you are merely being carried. For years, freedom felt theoretical. You analyzed it. You discussed it. You compared your situation to others. You pointed to the system, your upbringing, your temperament, your luck. And again, much of it was accurate. Influence is real. Structures are powerful. History shapes personality. Opportunity is unevenly distributed. Existentialism does not deny any of this. What it denies is the leap from influence to inevitability. There is always a moment, quiet and uncomfortable, when you realize, even under pressure, you participated. Even under expectation, you agreed. Even under limitation, you responded. That realization is not empowering at first, it is exposing, because it removes the last protective layer between you and your authorship. Blame is emotionally efficient. It narrows the world into a clear explanation. This happened because of them. This is just how society works. I'm wired this way. I had no choice. But when you slow down and examine those sentences, something subtle appears. I had no choice often means I did not want to accept the cost of the alternative. This is just how things are often means I don't want to disrupt what is familiar. I'm just like this often means I'm afraid of what changing would demand. Authenticity does not require you to conquer circumstances. It requires you to tell the truth about your participation within them. Even refusal is a choice. Even silence is a stance. Even staying where you are is an act. You may not have chosen the conditions, but you are choosing your response to them. That distinction changes everything, because once you accept that you are responding, not merely being carried, your life becomes authored again. And authorship brings weight. Regret becomes sharper. Possibility becomes wider. Responsibility becomes unavoidable. You can no longer outsource your decisions to fate, biology, culture, or timing without knowing you are simplifying the story. Maturity begins when excuses lose their emotional payoff. They no longer protect your self-image. They no longer calm your anxiety. They no longer dissolve your guilt. Instead, they feel thin, transparent. You start noticing the gap between what happened to you and what you did with it. And in that gap, freedom stands quietly. Authenticity does not mean omnipotence. You are not suddenly in control of outcomes. You cannot rewrite the past. You cannot eliminate constraint. What you can eliminate is denial. You stop pretending that freedom must be total in order to exist. You recognize that even partial freedom is still freedom, and partial freedom still carries responsibility. There is a steadiness that forms here. You stop dramatizing your autonomy. You stop declaring independence loudly. You stop framing yourself as either victim or hero. Instead, you acknowledge something simpler. I am involved. I am choosing, even when it is difficult. I am participating, even when it is constrained. I am shaping, even when I feel shaped. That acknowledgement is not triumphant, it is grounded. Excuses begin to feel unnecessary, and in their place, a quieter posture emerges. Ownership. Not aggressive, not self-blaming, not inflated, just honest. You stop negotiating with your freedom. You stop pretending it isn't there. And in that shift, subtle but decisive, you step fully into adulthood. No more excuses. Not because life is fair, but because you are no longer hiding from your role in it. Once excuses fall away, something unexpected happens. Life becomes quieter, not easier, not clearer, just less theatrical. In the beginning of existential awakening, everything feels intense. Freedom feels overwhelming. Responsibility feels heavy. Meaning feels urgent. But authenticity does not sustain itself through intensity. It settles into consistency. There is a temptation, especially after philosophical clarity, to turn life into a statement, to announce your independence, to redefine yourself publicly, to perform authenticity as if it were a visible transformation. But real commitment does not require an audience. It does not need a declaration. It does not need to feel extraordinary. Acting without drama means you stop turning every decision into a moral spectacle. You choose honesty without posting about it. You choose discipline without announcing it. You choose boundaries without hostility. Your actions stop being reactions to expectation. They become expressions of alignment. Integrity is not loud. It is repetitive. It is showing up when no one is watching. It is keeping a promise when it would be easier not to. It is correcting yourself quietly instead of defending your ego. Responsibility without self-importance is a subtle form of strength. You are not trying to prove you're free. You are not trying to demonstrate moral superiority. You are not trying to impress yourself with your courage. You are simply participating honestly. Authenticity, when matured, loses its drama. It looks ordinary. You wake up. You make choices. You carry consequences. You adjust. There are no grand speeches, no internal applause, no mythic transformation, just steadiness. Existential strength is not explosive. It does not require rebellion every morning. It does not demand heroic suffering. It does not insist on constant reinvention. It is steady authorship. It is consistency between what you affirm and what you do. You do not need to feel inspired to live honestly. You do not need to feel powerful to take responsibility. You do not need to feel heroic to act with integrity. Feeling dramatic is not proof of authenticity. Feeling ordinary is not proof of mediocrity. The most grounded form of freedom is calm. It does not seek validation. It does not chase recognition. It does not require spectacle. It simply continues. Acting without drama is what existential maturity looks like in practice. No performance, no excessive intensity, no self-mythologizing. Just a quiet pattern of decisions that align with what you claim to value. And over time, that steadiness becomes more powerful than any declaration, Because authenticity is not proven once, it is lived repeatedly. And repetition, not intensity, builds a life. At some point, you realize something unsettling. There is no final authority coming to certify your principles. No universal court declaring your values objectively correct. No cosmic structure guaranteeing that your commitments align with ultimate truth. And yet, you must still choose what to stand for. This is where existential maturity deepens. You hold values you cannot universally prove. You defend honesty without demonstrating that honesty is metaphysically rewarded. You practice restraint without assurance that justice will prevail. You do not have absolute justification, but you have alignment. Owning your values without proof does not mean abandoning thought. It means accepting that justification has limits. There is a difference between reasoning through your commitments and waiting for them to become undeniably universal. Authenticity does not require certainty. It requires coherence. Coherence between what you affirm and how you behave. You may not be able to prove that compassion is ultimately grounded in the structure of reality, but you can live compassionately. You may not be able to prove that loyalty matters in every context, but you can embody it in yours. And here, a subtle strength appears. You accept that others will disagree. Not everyone shares your values. Not everyone interprets the world the same way. Not everyone builds meaning from the same foundations. Conviction without absolutism means you can stand by your principles without demanding that they become universal law. You act because you affirm them, not because the universe guarantees them. Living ethically without expecting reward is not cynicism. It is clarity. You do not expect cosmic applause. You do not expect moral accounting to balance perfectly. You do not assume that goodness will always be recognized. You act because your integrity depends on it. That is ownership. Ownership means you stop searching for metaphysical reinforcement. You do not need eternity to validate kindness. You do not need destiny to justify discipline. You do not need transcendence to sustain commitment. You act according to what you affirm, even when nothing guarantees it matters beyond the present. This does not make your values weaker. It makes them chosen. And chosen values carry a different kind of weight. They are not inherited reflexively. They are not defended out of fear. They are not imposed by authority. They are affirmed consciously. Conviction without absolutism allows firmness without fanaticism. You stand steady without claiming final truth. You commit without claiming infallibility. You live ethically without demanding cosmic confirmation. And that balance, steady but not rigid, is one of the most mature expressions of existential authenticity. No proof, no ultimate guarantee, just alignment between belief and action. And that alignment becomes your ground. For a long time, we are taught to imagine life as a story that must build towards something extraordinary. A defining purpose, a unique calling, a breakthrough moment that justifies every struggle before it. The pressure is subtle but constant. You must discover what you are meant to do. You must turn your life into something remarkable. You must become exceptional in order to matter. Even existential awakening can accidentally fuel this pressure. After confronting freedom and absurdity, it is tempting to respond with intensity, to craft a dramatic purpose in defiance of silence. But there is another path. Letting go of the grand narrative does not mean abandoning ambition. It means releasing the demand that your existence must resemble a myth. When you drop the need for a theatrical life arc, something relaxes. You no longer measure your worth against destiny. You no longer interpret every setback as a failure of cosmic significance. You no longer treat ordinary seasons as wasted time. Existential maturity allows scale to shrink without meaning shrinking. You may never discover a single ultimate why. You may never achieve a world-altering success. You may never feel certain that your life fits into a larger design. And yet, you can still live deliberately. Small commitments begin to matter more than grand missions. Showing up for someone consistently, building skill quietly over time, keeping promises no one else notices, refusing shortcuts when integrity is easier to compromise. These are not epic acts. They do not generate headlines. They do not fulfill a mythic destiny, but they accumulate. Progress shifts from destiny-driven to integrity-driven. Instead of asking, "Will this make my life significant in the grand scheme?" you ask, "Is this consistent with the person I am choosing to be?" That shift changes the scale of meaning. You do not need to transform the world to justify your existence. You do not need to be extraordinary to be authentic. Authenticity is not spectacle. It is alignment repeated. You accept that most of life will be ordinary. Meals, conversations, workdays, mistakes, small improvements. No dramatic arc tying it all together. No guaranteed climax. And yet, within that ordinariness, depth exists. A life can be meaningful without being monumental. Meaning does not require scale. It requires coherence. You can live without a cinematic purpose and still live fully. You can care deeply about limited things. You can commit locally rather than universally. You can build something that matters to a small circle instead of history. Letting go of the grand narrative is not mediocrity. It is freedom from performance. You stop treating your life as a project to impress the future. You stop comparing your path to mythical expectations. You stop demanding that every decision feel significant. Simplicity becomes strength. After the intensity of existential confrontation, freedom, anxiety, absurdity, what remains is quieter. No epic arc, no guaranteed destiny, no dramatic culmination, just a pattern of chosen actions. And that pattern, sustained honestly over time, becomes your life. Not legendary, not scripted, just lived, deliberately. And that is enough. After all the confrontation, freedom, responsibility, absurdity, something softer begins to emerge. Not certainty, not resolution, but equilibrium. You no longer expect final answers. You stop waiting for the moment when everything will suddenly make sense. You stop imagining a future version of yourself who will feel completely sure. You stop believing that clarity must be total in order to act. Life remains open. Questions remain open. And instead of fighting that openness, you begin to live inside it. Peace with uncertainty does not mean you stop thinking. It means you stop demanding closure. Doubt will return. It always does. There will be days when your values feel fragile, when your choices feel reversible, when your direction feels unclear. Existential maturity does not eliminate those moments. It normalizes them. You understand that freedom is permanent. There is no final decision that locks life into safety, no single commitment that removes risk forever, no worldview that prevents future questioning. Freedom is not a phase, it is the condition. And instead of trying to escape that condition, you begin to inhabit it. Stability shifts from external guarantees to internal posture. You find steadiness not because outcomes are predictable, but because you have accepted unpredictability. You stop demanding certainty and start tolerating reality. Reality is open. Reality is unfinished. Reality does not promise reassurance, and that no longer feels like a threat. Authenticity does not remove anxiety. It places anxiety in context. You recognize it as a sign of awareness, not catastrophe. You feel it without interpreting it as failure. You allow it without building your identity around it. There is calm in that. Not because everything is solved, but because you no longer need everything to be solved. You act without final proof. You commit without eternal guarantee. You adjust when necessary. You endure doubt without collapsing. This is not heroic triumph. It is balance. Not resolution, equilibrium. The questions remain. The silence remains. Freedom remains. But so do you. Standing not because the universe confirmed you, not because uncertainty disappeared, but because you have learned to live without demanding that it does. Peace with uncertainty is not certainty gained, it is anxiety integrated. And in that integration, life continues, steady, open, and honest. Existentialism does not end with revelation, it ends with posture. You stand. No script, no guarantee, no validation, but no denial either. Freedom remains. So does your response. That is enough. And that's it for today, my friend. You are listening to Wise Alchemy. The conversation ends here, but the thinking doesn't. You and I will meet again. Thank you.